as we wait for the students to settle down, once again, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. That's better, thank you so much. My name is Professor Buleng Sekgalo, and I'm going to be your program director this afternoon. I hold the position of Chief Albert Luthuli Research Chair here at UNISA. And I mention this in particular because Albert Luthuli, as many of you might know, was the very first Black African to win the Nobel Prize in 1960, which was then awarded in 1961 when he could travel to Oslo. Those of you who've been following our PowerPoint presentation here might have seen his picture together with his wife. So it's really an honor to be directing the program this afternoon. Allow me to start by acknowledging our Principal and Vice Chancellor, Professor Buleng Linkabula. I'd like to acknowledge our Honorable Minister, Honorable Mr. Espen, Barth, Eide, Foreign Minister of the Kingdom of Norway. Good ettermiddag, so I tried. To our diplomatic community, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for braving the tricky weather this afternoon to be with us here for this very important conversation. Your presence here is testament to the importance of the conversation we're about to have this afternoon, so we're honored to have you. Relations between South Africa and Norway are founded on strong Nordic support and solidarity, which we saw during the struggle for freedom here in South Africa. Today, the two countries cooperate on a wide range of interlinking global issues that include global health, climate change, renewable energy, blue economy, peace and reconciliation, multilateralism, and trade and investment. South Africa and Norway also cooperate closely on women, peace, and security, something very close to my heart, partnering on the Gertrude Schope Annual Dialogue Forum on Conflict Resolution and Peacemaking here in the continent. Today's discussion, ladies and gentlemen, is also an opportunity for all of us to understand the new strategy for Norwegian engagement with African countries, recently launched as a response to a changing geopolitical landscape and global challenges. It will equally be an opportunity to understand how Norway is navigating its way through a difficult geopolitical terrain, including its response to the wars in Ukraine and in Gaza, and its position on efforts by the Global South to reform multilateral institutions such as the United Nations, the World Bank, and the IMF. So it's all these issues, ladies and gentlemen, that I'm hoping are going to be an integral part of our conversation this afternoon. But before we get into all the exciting conversations and engagements, please allow me to call our Vice Chancellor and Principal, Professor Buleng Linkabula, to come and do the official opening and to offer welcoming remarks. Please join me in welcoming Professor Linkabula.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. Let me take this opportunity to welcome you to the University of South Africa. His Excellency Honorable Espen Barth, Eide, Foreign Minister of the Kingdom of Norway, Dr. Mthembu, the Executive Director, Institute for Global Dialogue, Dr. Tong, Director, Special Projects and all Executive Management of the University of South Africa, His Excellency Minister Councillor Helman Miss Hellstrom, Embassy of Norway, Excellency Mr. Salih Omar Abdu, Ambassador of the State of Eritrea, the Dean of the Diplomatic Corps, and all honorable ambassadors and diplomatic representatives here in South Africa. Advocate MJ Maluleke, the Director General in the Department of Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities, our lead in international relations, Ambassador Maud Dlomo, our own Inspector General. Where is he sitting? Yes, we're quite appreciative for your presence. All representatives from different media houses, distinguished members of the audience, ladies and gentlemen. It is my singular honor to welcome you to the University of South Africa, the university that prides itself as the University of the Land, the only university that the country has acceded to naming the important insight of higher education and the pursuit of science as an important lever for socio-economic, political, and other important aspects of transformation. We're not only appreciative of our university being the lever for science, for human and ecological encounter or living together. We're quite proud that this is the university that's the progenitor of higher education in South Africa, the first in the world to teach via distance and to share the assets of such a distance modality, including in the aftermath of COVID-19. We're quite also appreciative, Your Excellency, for your presence at the University of South Africa and in our country, because our Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Lamola, is an alumnus of this university, as it is the case with President Mandela, President Mbeki, President Ramaphosa, giving testament to the place of this university in the democratic dividend and transformations that our society requires. Norway has been, as Professor Sekgalo has rightly stated, quite central to the imagination of South Africa towards the democratic era. It was a partner in solidarity, supporting the various calls for freedom, democracy, for dealing away with the apartheid and its discontent, as well as ensuring that the humanity of black people who were not seen as human in the apartheid context was restored. This is quite an important aspect of global solidarity that is even more required in our global multilateral systems, where we need, as societies, as humanity, to ensure that no one's humanity is undermined. Our countries have also closely cooperated on the imperative for gender justice, and Professor Sekgalo has already reminded us of that important imperative. We are quite also impelled to be advocates in the government of national unity that we have to ensure that this is not a dividend that's lost, but we continue to advocate for that. The Norway Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security 2023 to 2024, as well as the Norwegian Government Action Plan on Gender and Sexual Diversity, resonates with our national laws, policies, programs, and aspirations of our society to ensure that women and men, girls and boys, and also people who do not want to define their sexuality are included in how we imagine the present as we do the future. I'm also appreciative to note that the Gender Equality Court that was established in 2002 in Norway was also an important inspiration for our negotiation of strengthening our own democracy, where the Commission on Gender Equality, the Human Rights Commission, and attended institutions in our country were developed. For us as the University of South Africa, we see the knowledge arena as an important multilateral scientific diplomacy that is necessary if these important aspirations, whether the Sustainable Development Goals, the National Development Plan of South Africa, and the Agenda 2063, where the continent of Africa brings together its aspirations and looks for partnerships and friends who are committed to such aspirations. We think and we believe as a university we have been quite central to ensuring that these principles that are humanizing, that create socio-economic contribution, that ensures that we honor the validity of each human being and their place under the sun become important. And this afternoon, Minister, Excellency, one of the asks that we have for ourselves as the university, but for the benefit of science, is the partnerships with universities in Norway, understanding the investment in science exchanges, in shared technologies, in ensuring that the knowledges of Africa are equally resonating and dialoguing with other knowledge systems become quite important imperatives. In the shifting geopolitical landscape and the partnership between Africa and Europe, it is important for us to look at this topic that you will be addressing for us, on how we could look into the grand questions that our societies in the global north and in the global south, including here at home, are grappling with. How do we deal with wars that divide humanity and where we hold different positions that do not even affirm the humanity of others? Perhaps this is a multilateral question that we in university wrestle with from scholarship, but perhaps the partnership of leading countries, South Africa and countries such as yourselves from the Nordic, can begin to grapple with these questions because they're questions of justice. Whether we think about Ukraine and Russia, or we think about Gaza, Palestine, and Israel, whether we think about Congo and the challenges of displacement that are going on, I suggest that these are quite important areas for multilateral discourse and efforts in trying to overcome these which undermine the integrity of our societies must be in question. Today's discussion is also about the opportunity to understand the new strategy for the Norwegian engagement with African countries, recently launched as a response to a changing geopolitical landscape and global challenges. It will equally be an important opportunity for us to understand how Norway is navigating its way through the difficult geopolitical contradictions, complexities, and the terrain, including its responses to wars in Ukraine and Gaza, and its position on efforts by the Global South, especially by South Africa and the African countries, to reform multilateral institutions such as the United Nations, the World Bank, and the International Monetary Fund, taking into cognizance some of the negative implications for our development as the continent that sometimes are yielded when these reforms are not established or at least engaged with. Finally, economic and science diplomacy have become of greater importance for South Africa, especially following the formation of the Government of National Unity. They've actually been quite central to the University of South Africa, precisely because many of our students come from the global north as they come from the global south. This was the university where even the United Kingdom, King George graduated from, meaning our expansive commitment to ensuring that knowledge is a multilateral benefit or a diplomatic benefit anywhere in the world still is meaningful today as it was in 1873 when we started. Finally, Norwegian investments in South Africa remain significant, particularly in renewable energy sector, NOFund, the Norwegian Investment Fund for Developing Countries, has been actively involved in various projects, partnering with UK CDC Group to invest 600 million in H1 Capital, a South African black-owned and managed renewable investment and development company. The same is true to the Nordic Institute, has been quite central to many of our colleagues and scholars in the continent who have looked into the opportunities of scholarly engagement, and we are hoping that this will also be centered in the engagement or even post-engagement processes. Established in 2009, Red Sun is based in Kimos in the Northern Cape, a region where approximately 90% of South African raisins are produced, and we are appreciative that these are quite important areas. But for us as the universities, the knowledge areas on aviation and aeronautics, on space sciences, on the square kilometer array investments become even more important for us for partnerships. And therefore, we are hoping through your engagement, whether with Norwegian Agency for Development Cooperation, including the scholars who are located in Norway, but also all over the world representing your country, that we are open as a university for engagement, for pursuing knowledge together in science, for ensuring that science diplomacy is still for the benefit of social justice as it is for economic transformation. Welcome to UNISA, the University of Leaders, the university committed to engaging in forming global citizens that are committed to being constructive agents of social change anywhere in the world where they reside. Welcome, colleagues. Enjoy the visit by the minister and the encounter amongst one another. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam Vice Chancellor, for your welcoming remarks. And I think in many ways you set a context for us as we enter into the conversation and we get ready to listen to the minister. Thank you for highlighting the importance of collaborations and solidarities, looking at our history and how that then impacts and influences the possible engagements, collaborations, scientific knowledge production, and the roles that countries such as Norway can play as we work together with countries such as South Africa. So thank you very much. Without wasting any more time, ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to invite Dr. Philani Mthembu, our Executive Director at the Institute of Global Dialogue, to come and introduce our keynote speaker for this afternoon. Thank you so much. Over to you, Doc. Please welcome him with a round of applause.
Thank you very much, colleagues. I think the Vice-Chancellor has, I think after her speaking, she's observed all protocol. So I can essentially just get in with the job and introduce who exactly is about to address us. You know, it's the Foreign Minister of Norway, but His Excellency Mr. Espen Barth Eide is the Foreign Minister of Norway and became Norway's became Norway's Minister of Foreign Affairs on the 16th of October 2023. From the 14th of October 2021, he was Minister of Climate and Environment. And of course, this is quite important because if you look at also some of the profile of the businesses that were being mentioned by our program director and also our vice chancellor, you'll see that there is quite a footprint also in renewables. So he has also practical experience in that regard. He is elected to the Norwegian Parliament as a representative from Oslo. And from 2017 to 2021, he was a member of Parliament and the Norwegian Labour Party's climate and energy spokesperson. Again, climate and energy. He was re-elected to the Parliament for the 2021 to 2025 legislative term, representing Oslo. And in the two Stoltenberg governments, Mr. Eide occupied various prominent positions, amongst them Foreign Minister, Minister of Defense, State Secretary for Foreign Affairs, State Secretary for Defense, State Secretary for Foreign Affairs again. And he doesn't only though have let's say a career in government and in politics, and I think this is quite important, because before that he was managing director and a member of the managing board of the World Economic Forum in Geneva from 2014 to 2016. But we are in an academic institution, and it's important also to note, it's important to note that he has also an extensive academic career. As a political scientist, worked as a senior fellow at the Norwegian Institute of International Affairs from 1993 to 2000, and again from 2002 to 2005, specializing on international security, European integration, defense, and international relations. And during his tenure at NUPI, he was deeply involved in several UN, EU, and NATO-related processes. Now, I could go on, but I think what's more important is to hear what Foreign Minister has to say, and hopefully spark a discussion, especially amongst those who carry student cards. And I think it would be great, to have an engagement on that basis, based on what Foreign Minister has to say. Foreign Minister, the floor is yours.
Wow, thank you for that fantastic introduction. And Vice Chancellor, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, faculty and students, and let me particularly welcome a group of students from Soweto who came in here. Really happy to see you too. We have the youth with us, and that's good when we talk about global affairs. So welcome to all of you. And I'm really proud and happy to be here at UNISA, a university with a very long history, 150 years, I believe, but also known from the anti-apartheid struggle, because it actually offered remote education to some very famous people who were imprisoned unlawfully at Robben Island and other places. So a very historic place. Let me start by saying that I just came out of 3 hours of excellent conversation with Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Lamola. First meeting between the two of us. He is, of course, quite new. We used to work with Foreign Minister Pandor, with whom we have a very high appreciation. I was very happy also to meet the new minister, and that was a confirmation of very solid and long-standing ties, and a joint desire to look into the future together. And Norway might be far away. It's at 60 degrees north, and now I believe we are at 28 degrees south, so that's quite a distance. Straight up, by the way. It's not, you just go straight and you will land in Norway if you don't stop on the way. But despite of this geographic distance, I think our political outlook and our analysis of the world and our views on many issues, maybe not every issue, but the vast majority of issues is quite similar, and that's a good thing in a complex world, as you introduced. So I will come to that. But let me first say, I thank you, Vice Chancellor, for mentioning the particular role that we tried to play from the Nordic countries during the anti-apartheid struggle. That's definitely true for the Norwegian government, and I think there was a picture earlier of Thorvald Stoltenberg, who invited people to breakfast at his home, former foreign minister. And you also mentioned that Albert Luthuli got the Peace Prize in Oslo in 1960, Desmond Tutu, of course, in 1984, and then third time, 10 years later, Nelson Mandela with the clerk in 1994 as part of this transition. This has really contributed to opening the eyes of Norwegians and the world to the South African cause. This is also a personal experience of mine. because I joined the labor youth movement when I was young, even younger than I am now, 45 years ago. And the first position of the national political position I was appointed to was in the board of the anti-apartheid movement in Norway. So from the early 80s, that was my daily business. We were involved in arguing for sanctions against apartheid South Africa, support of ANC, but also the other struggles in the neighborhood, working closely with what is now the SADC countries, singing Free Nelson Mandela, and this was very much a part of my youth. I'm proud of that, which I'm happy to share that, but I also share that because I was definitely not alone. This was a very sort of common cause that people really cared about, because we felt that apartheid was a total affront to everything we had said in the UN Charter and the Human Rights Charter and the key principles. You simply cannot have a country that divides people in that way, and you had to get rid of that. So we took a position. We were not neutral, we were not impartial. We took a position, and we did not want to negotiate a compromise. It was not like we would say a little bit apartheid is fine as long as it's not too much. No, it's totally wrong and has to go, which of course was also the outcome of the struggle, and which we then could celebrate with the dawn of New South Africa 30 years ago this summer. But we did not only fight with you or all those people who were in this struggle against apartheid. We also fought for democracy, which is why I also really cherish the fact that democracy has really established itself very solidly in South Africa. And I think the recent election, in which ANC, which is a party with which my party, the Labour Party, has close relations, came out strong, but not strong enough to run on its own, and where for the first time in 30 years you established a national unity government, or a government of national unity, which means that parties, key politicians, are now learning something I also learned over my time, how to work in coalitions. I was part of the last, probably the last ever government of only Labour Party ministers. And then I was part of the first government where we governed with anybody else. And in that coalition, we had one party who had been in government many times, but not with us, and which was to the center, to the right of us, but still in the center. And then we had one government to the left of us who had never governed at all anything. So that was quite a learning experience for all of us, and inspired by a very friendly conversation I had with Minister Lamolle, I said that having the experience of representing the larger party in coalitions, a key learning is to allow the smaller parties to sometimes to shine. Allow also the junior partner to get something done as government consensus, which is their thing, which can make them shine. That is really a good investment in a long-standing coalition. And coalitions is it's a normalcy today in most countries, and I think South Africa will do that really well. So this is also a tribute to a long fight against apartheid, but also for democracy, with all the democracy entails, which is, of course, the rule of the majority, but not only that, it's also the restraints on power. It's also the division of power into legislative and governance and judiciary, and the institutions that are put in place to respect the roles of minorities. So South Africa has really arrived at a point which I think we can, particularly now after 30 years, say that this was really a very worthwhile process. Congratulations. It's good to be here and to see that. So this is about our Norwegian, but also my personal relationship to this country. And I see Jackie Sillers in the room. Thank you for being with us. I met Vasu Gonden yesterday, and I don't think he's here today, but we had a nice dinner yesterday. These are people I've been working with for almost 30 years, because when I was at NUPI, as you mentioned, we established something called the Training for Peace program, or rather the government which I was not part of then, I was a researcher at the NUPI, established a training program that we jointly ran between South Africa and Norway, involving also neighboring countries, and it's still going on, and I was there in the early days. So great to see friends from that time in the room. Thank you for being here. So I have really a long story with this country, and which is why I'm particularly happy to be here. Well, go into the substance. You mentioned, Vice Chancellor, we live in a very complex world. No, frankly, we've always lived in a complex world. It's not like I remember that year where everything was easy. But you are totally right. You are totally right. It is, having been 60 years on this planet, I don't think there's ever been such a complex set of realities that we have now, because the world is, I grew up under what we call the Cold War, which in my part of the world was cold. It was not cold here. It was not cold in, it was not very cold in Indochina or in Latin America or elsewhere in Asia or in Southern Africa. It was rather hot because the superpowers were, engaging through their proxies with all kinds of local conflicts. But it was cold in the sense that you did not have a direct confrontation between the nuclear powers. They stood away from that. So in that sense, in my continent, Europe, Checkpoint Charlie was in a sense, the center of the security universe. That's the point where East Germany met West Germany in Berlin. And as long as Checkpoint Charlie was stable and the border was stable, we felt that we would survive. So in that sense, it was a stable world where I lived. And I say immediately, not for everybody else, but where I lived. Then came the end of the Cold War. And that's the sort of the fall of the Berlin Wall, many European countries we used to call Eastern Europe became just Europe. They joined EU, they joined NATO, and we had in this continent and on many continents a very fast forward progress towards more democracies, and we had several democracies defined not only by somebody winning an election, but actually winning an election and then respecting that they have to leave when they do not win the next election, which is really what democracy is all about, because otherwise you have one man, one vote, one time, which is not exactly what democracy is all about, but you saw this spreading. And we believed that we lived in a time of, working towards eternal peace, and the conflicts that we were studying, Jackie and others and myself, were serious conflicts, but I think we could say we thought there were bumps on the road to peace. Eventually all countries would be democratic, peaceful, benign, cooperative, mixed economies, and this would be the future. And what we're seeing now is that we have a world where we have many of these sort of low tension regional conflicts, some high tension civil conflicts, transnational conflicts, as we had in the 90s and the early 2000s, but we also have geopolitical competition coming back. So we get that part of the Cold War. I'm not saying we're in a new Cold War. We get that part that superpowers who are organized industrial countries compete on almost everything, militarily, economically, politically, and so on. So this is a complex world in which it is hard to navigate. And a good starting point for navigating it is look at the principles and rules that we developed when last time we came out of the biggest war ever, namely the Second World War. It led to the establishment of the United Nations in 1945, not after the war, but during the war. Or the formal establishment was, the war was ended, but the negotiations happened during the war. And the core principle then was we do not want more wars like this. We should ban invasions, we should ban wars of aggression, and the use of military force should be restricted to self-defense, which you could conduct on your own or collectively, or on the behalf of the UN, meaning that you have a UN Security Council mandate. This was sort of the heritage of 1945. And then later, a few years later, we got the Human Rights Convention, and we got the Geneva Protocols, which means now we have rules saying how, when can you use force, how can you use force, and what can you not do when you use force, and human rights should be valid for all. This is theory, of course, not always the practice, but this is really what came out of that. So I think when we're trying to navigate today's conflicts, we need to see how do they relate to these serious, these norms and these principles, and let's try to stay principled. I am very much against double standards. I think that it's a fair argument that there are double standards in the world, and double standards is not twice as good as one standard, it's very bad. You know, it's not like you are more standard, it's bad. Because if you actually practice double standards, it basically means that norms is a menu from which you choose when it suits you, but I think the norms should have been applied equally across the board. That's what we did when we stood up against apartheid. We took a side. We did not ask for a peaceful settlement where everybody would be happy. We took a side on what was the right outcome. And that right outcome actually occurred. And thanks to the people here, of course, not that we did it, but I mean, we supported the people who did it, and that at least played a certain role in the success of the anti-apartheid movement. When we stand up for Palestine, we do that because we think very serious key principles are violated. We do recognize that after the brutal attack of Hamas on Israeli citizens, Israel obviously has a right to defend itself against terror. Every state has that. But that exercise of power, of force, should be constrained by humanitarian law, by the laws of warfare, and it is being violated. And we were one of the earliest countries in the West to say very clearly that what we are seeing is military excesses that do not respect the two founding principles of proportionality and distinction, basically saying distinction means you should fight fighters, military or illegal fighters or terrorists or whatever it is, but fight the actual armed opposition, but you should take due care not to harm civilians. It's not prohibited under any circumstance, but you should take active actions to prevent civilians from dying, and there should be a proportionality between the use of force and the purpose you want to achieve. And we argued that both the principle of distinction and proportionality has been violated, and we said that early. More and more countries say that now, but frankly, I say proudly, we said it early because we saw it early. Of course, this was no news to South Africans, but I say this because it was important to be also a European country speaking up for that. We asked for ceasefire, unconditional ceasefire at an early point, and we reminded the world that there is no other outcome of this than a Palestinian state. We have the Oslo Accords, which have been unfulfilled, and we know them very intimately because they happened in Oslo. But the idea has always been that there should be an Israeli state that should be left in peace, beside a Palestinian state that should also be left in peace, and these two things should be agreed. And for 30 years, we were leading a process that, in theory, was waiting for the opportune moment where the two sides will peacefully sit down and say, now is the time to solve all these issues. It didn't happen. And we realized we needed to change gears. And what happened after, months into the Gaza conflict, we realized that we had to move forward and recognize the state of Palestine. We know very well that the state does not actually appear just because you recognize it. There's much more that it takes. But it was a strong signal joining the majority of the countries on the planet in saying that we really have to lift the position of the Palestinians, and not any Palestinians, but the Palestinian government, the PA, the Palestinian Authority, which actually does exist. So when we recognize Palestine, and when South Africa recognized Palestine many years ago, or Spain or India or Brazil, or you name it, recognized Palestine, they recognize the state of Palestine, which is a defined institution out of the Oslo Accords. And we will keep fighting for peace in the region, but not any peace. A peace that means that we stop the fighting in Gaza, we stop the incursions and illegal settlements in the West Bank, and we help establish a Palestinian state. And we work together now with a group of Arab, OIC, and European countries, and a few others, who have taken a particular role in trying to lay out a map of a regional peace settlement, which entails all this: a Palestinian state, demobilization of the armed fractions of Hamas, but with not Israeli, but with Arab and other support, strengthening of the PA, normalization with Israel, and this will be the foundations of a better development there. So this is something we discussed closely today, and I think we have very much commonality of view on this. But inspired by this, I will take you back to my region and my neighborhood, Ukraine and Russia. So here our position is also very clear. That is that there is an aggressor and a victim. So the aggressor is called Russia. Russia is our neighbor. We have traditionally had a decent relation to Russia. We have had that border for hundreds of years. It's been stable. We cooperate on many issues, including fishing in the Arctic Sea and so on. But we are very clear. Ukraine is a free, sovereign, independent country that wants to choose its own path, and it was invaded by Russia. And that breaks the first law of the UN, which I said earlier. That is a violation of the core principle, and actually the core reason the UN was set up. Because before everything else came in, development and health and climate and very, very important issues, this was the key point of establishing the UN. These kinds of wars are not legal. So we, like South Africa and many other countries, we hope for peace. But again, not any peace. It's like in South Africa back then, like in Palestine now. It has to be a just peace, and it has to respect some fundamental principles of international law. And I think, you know, if we really seriously want to collaborate on preventing the establishment of double standards, we all have to look into what are the standards we should check against, and the rule book is there. It's called the UN Charter, the Human Rights Convention, and the Geneva Conventions, and they will actually guide us to deal with this. Does that solve all problems? Well, frankly, not all. But it's a very good guidance to see where we're heading. Now, then I would also like to say, we, again, far away from here, are taking a keen interest in both in trying to deal with the challenges of this continent, including in this neighborhood, and the opportunities. And since it's much more fun to speak about opportunities, I start with the challenges. I mean, we recognize that, that we have in this continent, I mean, to your north in the DRC, decades of fighting. Hard to define what kind of fighting it is. You know, is it civil, domestic? Is it sort of it's incursions? You know, even defining what it is contested. But of course, South Africa and now SADC is taking a position and also trying to help in Eastern Congo. That's an area I visited. I know what it looks like. On one hand, beautiful place, but so much torn by centuries of mismanagement and violence. And this, of course, is very high on the agenda, and we very much hope that this Luanda-led process will help to move towards some kind of settlement of that issue between Rwanda and DRC. We have worked with South Sudan for 50 years. And we were very involved. Norway was very involved, and the CPA, the Comprehensive Peace Agreement, was finally signed in 2005, and we celebrated the reception of the 193rd member of the UN, South Sudan, in 2013. But we are very disappointed, like South Africa is, about what happened later. And the sad thing is that people I know, Salva Kiir, Riek Machar, Paganamon, and these people I've been to Norway, seeing me there. I've been in South Sudan, Juba, and elsewhere seeing them. They have now been involved in sort of very serious infighting, and we are doing our best with South Africa, with Kenya, with the African Union to try to continue our engagement in promoting a dialogue towards implementing what is the 2018 agreement that was actually signed by all the parties but has not been respected in practice. Straight to the north, Sudan. Probably the most dramatic humanitarian situation anywhere, even with Gaza being as horrible as it is. When you look at the numbers, it's beaten by Sudan, but lost to many in the world. Not here, I think, but to the global audience, forgotten because the bandwidth does not give space for more than 2 conflicts, and when they've heard about Ukraine and Gaza, it's full. But Sudan is there. We will want to continue right now working on humanitarian access, and likewise the Horn of Africa, and the whole Sahel belt countries and regions that we work on, and where we're seeing some very alarming developments that are transnational in nature, and because they're spreading from one country to the other. So these are serious challenges, and we work with this country, with the AU, with regional organizations, with other countries, to see where we can fit into African-led initiatives, in particular, to try to deal with these issues. On the other hand, and here's the good news, Africa, in my view, knowing it reasonably well and having traveled most of the continent, is first and foremost, in my view, a continent of colossal opportunity. You know, the amount of riches of nature, the opportunity to now transform sun or wind into energy, which you can use then not to export your raw materials to countries who want to take them away from you, but to manufacture and build things and services that you then can sell, is really very, very available. This is absolutely an opportunity for this continent, for South Africa, for Southern Africa, for Africa, to really try to see the connection. And when I met yesterday a number of Norwegian companies and Norwegian-supported companies in Cape Town, who are all in the renewable energy field, they could, on the one hand, tell me about all the projects that are now coming online, sun battery parks, where you both produce electricity but also can keep it stable over time, wind farms, and there's a lot going on. But they also said something which I recognize very much from my own work on energy and climate, is that it's simply not enough to produce renewable energy. You need to get it to people. You need a grid. You need a distribution transmission system. So, the one thing you need to know about the green transition of energy is that there is no transition without transmission. And what that means is that you need to build the connector, the grids. That sounds boring, maybe, but it's really the path to the future, to really get all this renewable energy to the factories, to the villages, to the cities, to produce the services and products that are integral to any country that wants to move from low income to middle income, and then from middle income to a high income country. This is all available, and and we want to be part of that journey. And why do we care about all these things? Is it because we don't want to look good on the planet? Well, no, not really. That's okay if somebody thinks so, but that's not the purpose. We think we are better off in a world that works, because we know that borders don't really protect you at the end of the day if the world collapses around you. So we are much better off in a world that cooperates, that works, and so on. And when we are seeing a world that does not, those of us who still want the world to work, to work according to some principles and to try to cooperate, need to do so. And I think sort of my main source of hope and inspiration is this thing, that you can actually now drive towards more regional cooperation. The free trade agreement across Africa, welcome, it's a great idea. It's much easier to get rich together than each on our own. In the 1930s, Europe tried mercantilism, which was we tried to export our economic problems to our neighbors. Those who know what happened after the 1930s know that that didn't work particularly well. It's much better to try to grow together by having markets that work across countries and across regions and try to connect. And that's true for trade, it's true for products, it's true for resources, it's true for energy, to really build that. So on that front, I think there is so much to work on together. And these things are all in our Africa strategy. It was introduced here now. We, of course, have strategic plans for resources, individual energy, and to really build that. So on that front, I think there is so much to work on together. And these things are all in our Africa strategy. It was introduced here now. We, of course, have strategic plans for our work with individual countries, and Africa is 55 countries. But we also see that there are some things that binds it together. So on the macro level, we now say we want to deep dive more into all these new opportunities. We will continue to work in peace and reconciliation. We will continue and strengthen our work on women, peace and security. We will continue to work on training for peace and peacekeeping, peace building, and all these things that we always did. But we want to move more into this new field of energy, industry, trade, economic opportunity, and releasing this economic opportunity. And I think that this country has a particular role. This is the most advanced economy in Africa. It's strong, it has a voice. And as Pilani and I were discussing dinner last night, if you have power and you don't use it, that might actually be neglect. it's a metaphor. If you're a police patrol watching crime, not doing something, well, that was neglect. If a lone stroller watches crime and don't intervene, it's not neglect because you shouldn't, right? So it's the same thing with countries. If you actually have power, I'm not saying military power, could be that as well, but if you have the ability to influence, well, you have to think about how you use it. So I very much believe that what we need are countries who are self-secured enough, who take a position, who stand up for something, and who try to use the soft power or smart power, whatever power it holds, to try to build a better organized world. This is what inspires me, and this is what inspires, I think, this government in South Africa. At least that's the way I see it. And that means also dealing with those challenges that are common to mankind. One of the worst things of all these wars, the worst thing is that people die. And there are lost opportunities, and you have people losing limbs and lives and their psyche, and it's horrible. But the other thing with it is that we spend so much time on man-made conflicts that we don't have the bandwidth we need to deal with the real problems that we have anyway, which is how to take care of our biodiversity, how to make sure we transition fast enough to stop warming the planet so we can still live here and our grandchildren can still live on this planet. How do we make sure that we stop pandemics when they start? Now kudos to South Africa and President Ramaphosa, who's taking a leading role on health, and now it's Mpox, and maybe this time we'll be able to break it before it really becomes a global calamity, which is contrary to what happened with COVID-19. But and of course poverty alleviation and all these things that we share, and which can only be solved if we cooperate. So, a particular motivation for stopping the wars is that there's so much better things to do on the planet with 8 billion people and counting than to fight with each other. And that's why we should go back and look at the rule book and the principles and stay principled. And that is my main point. Be firm, stand, be principled, and let's work together. And so if South Africa and Norway can do that, why can't the rest? Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Foreign Minister. I think you've given us a good overview of where, we run a program called South Africa in the World, and I think you've given us a good overview of Norway in the world. Where does Norway stand? What challenges does it confront? How does it seek to actually work with countries like South Africa to actually tackle some of those challenges? And you've met with the likes of our own Minister of International Relations, but you've also met with others in business. You've also met with members of the Portfolio Committee on International Relations. And I think now is a good time to, we are in an academic environment, and we do value robust engagement. And so this is an invite to all of you. We have members of the diplomatic corps. We have stakeholders from government. We have stakeholders, representatives, and those who are parts of institutions of higher learning. We have members of the business community. We have the student community. And of course, we have UNISA staff, we have members of the media, and so we have a good blend of stakeholders. But we've also got youth organizations, institutions such as your South African BRICS Youth Association. We've got youth organizations such as Youth Managers. We have foundations working with young people, for instance, in Alexandra Township, Mohorosi Foundation. We have also reputable individuals who are working in strategic areas, both within the state, but also those who have been part of various organs. of the state. And, you know, I think about the likes, for instance, of Ambassador Welly Lentlapo. We're also fortunate to have the likes of Inspector General of Intelligence, Mr. Faisal. And so I think we have a good mix of stakeholders here. And I would like to, and I know that the minister's time is pressed, but I would like to get as much questions as possible. Comments, questions based on the minister's address. And those who know me will know that when I don't see a question or a hand up, I nominate. You know, so you know, you should be prepared for that. And I am expecting definitely a question up there from some of our students from schools in Soweto. But there's also a number of organizations that I've recognized here. And I'd definitely like to, you know, get your views on what the minister has just mentioned here. So with that, colleagues, let's open it up to the floor. It's no longer about the people sitting here. It's about you. And I am sort of taking my hand around and seeing who would like to do the icebreaker. I start with experience. Start with experience, and then I go up there to the young people from Soweto. I come here, and I come here. So there's 4 that I've recognized, and then we'll take a bit more. I see also Tlompo here has picked up some courage along the way. So, Ambassador, let's start with you. I think everyone has a device on their tables, and so you just press the button, and you should be audible.
No, thank you, Pilon. I'm going to deliberately avoid protocol and go straight into my observations and questions. Minister, I like your insistence on double standards and principle. And I think this is what must guide us in diplomacy and international relations. You know, I once worked at the United Nations Department of Political Affairs. I was seconded there. I was dealing with Africa One, which dealt with all the conflicts that were blazing in the continent at that time. And the meaning of double standards, that's where I learned it. Because the Security Council Secretariat was reporting to that department. And we had a lot of engagements with the P5. So I know what double standards means, and I learned it there in reality, and it continues even today. That's why the Security Council finds itself not in a position to apply its mandate. It's precisely because of that. And that must change. Double standards. In fact, principles, I don't think sometimes apply. They don't apply. It's self-interest that drives people and the power struggles that take place there. Where we've gone through that thing, we've experienced them. I know the Cold War. I was in the student movement at the time. And I understand what happened. We're active in the debates and discussions at the time with the IUS and all those student movements, and of course youth movements. So one understands all of those things. So when you talk Cold War, and when people say that it stopped, it was actually paused. And now we're back in because, to quote President Biden, he likes to use the term reset. It has been reset. That's why we're in this mess. But let me end up with one question. I won't go to Palestine because I think your position in the history of Palestine is known. You have taken a very bold stand. And then you understand even the application of the concept of self-defense as you define it. I have a problem with that. I don't think it's an issue of self-defense. It's a reckless response to the October 7 attack by Hamas, which is unacceptable. What is happening now in Gaza is something else. Let's not go there. I want to just end up by saying that whatever we do in the continent, we should take into account all the spoilers, some of them who have a long history in this continent, from Europe, because that's what we have to contend with today. In Sudan, we have seen this tension and confrontation that was taking place there because of the support of the RSF by Ukraine. It's a fact. In Mali, we just saw something recently. So if they want to take that war and bring it to this continent, please, because we've got access to them and we'll use our limited one, they must stop it. This is not the first time. The UN had to call them to order one time because they were selling arms to rebels in exchange for diamonds. I was chair of the Kimberley process, talking about something I know. So they must stop this thing. Otherwise, whatever little sympathy that we might develop towards them disappears very fast. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to take all those questions. Let's go up there to one of our students. Introduce yourself and then go with your question.
My name.
Just make sure that it's on.
Okay. My name is Natiju, and I'm from a public school in the name of Mshwantambo Secondary School. But what I wanted to ask is a question which I expect for you to answer. As the Minister of Norway Foreign Affairs said, are we sorting the war between Gaza and the wars on Europe, like Russia faces Ukraine? Are we sorting it forcefully or non-forcefully? Because as the Minister said, it is better to take the problems of a nation and give it to other nations, as in the past, mostly nations in Europe used to do that, and they gained from that. So, what things are South Africa and Norway doing in order to stop the wars that's happening? Thank you. That was my question.
No, excellent. Thank you very much. There's a hand here, and then I'm coming up here.
Good afternoon, colleagues, and acknowledging Minister as well on the insights you shared. I think, Minister, for your history in terms where you've served over the recent months, it's been interesting that you led the environmental agenda and now on foreign affairs. By introduction, Hiten Palmer from the non-profit organization, the Electric Mission, advancing the agenda of electric vehicles. I think on that point that I mentioned on your portfolio on the environment and climate and now leading foreign affairs, we have just concluded in the process of concluding a bilateral with Norway on learned lessons on electric vehicles and recommendations to South Africa. But from your perspective, and certainly within the role that you played in your portfolio on environment and climate, what would be your perspectives for Africa in also looking at your visit right now on the recommendations for African countries not to become a dumping ground for redundant technologies such as internal combustion engine vehicles and really leapfrog from the mineral wealth that we have in the region to really move into electric vehicles and also achieve the Agenda 2063. Thank you.
Thank you. Rear Admiral Higgs.
Thank you very much, Pilani. Minister, thank you very much indeed for most comprehensive presentation on Norway. I was very privileged 30 years ago when sanctions were lifted against South Africa to be sent to the US Naval War College. And my biggest ally there was the Norwegian Admiral. And when I introduced myself, his wife actually burst into tears in the thing. So there's a wonderful bond there. I've been very involved with the South African military and the Navy in particular in putting South Africa globally on the map. And I think it's been very significant. The specific question is, could you ever see Norway joining the other 58 countries who have a defense office in Pretoria where lots of things are discussed and perhaps to an extent the future of our subcontinent can be shaped in a meaningful way? Thank you, Pelani.
Thank you. Let me ask Hlompo. And by the way, she recently participated, Minister, in one of the programs that Norway supports with the Department of International Relations, the Gertrude Schoppe annual lecture. So, Hlompo?
Greetings. Minister, having highlighted on Norway's position in the world, I would like to find out, now focusing on Africa, how does Norway measure the effectiveness of its support and interventions in African conflict zones?
Colleagues, because I know Foreign Minister's time is tight, I would like to take maybe another two. Okay, take three. One, there was one here, yes, two. So if you can get your questions in, like less than 30 seconds, then we can definitely get through them and allow Foreign Minister to group them and answer them. Yeah, let's go up there.
Thank you, Foreign Minister, for your input. I just want to ask, we spoke about peace and conflict resolution. And do you not think that we are using a checkbox exercise when it comes to peace building processes, and thus the implementation of these agreements don't seem to work, like in the case of South Sudan? I would want to ask that. And it's prescribed by the UN. So you look at 140 agreements that seem to not work. And then secondly, one of the things that you did not refer to, how does the digital environment, which has been termed to be biased in its makeup when it comes to Africa, negatively impact our development? Thank you.
Let's stay there. There's a young person up there who I recognized. Yeah, go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kopano Moraga, and I am from the Foundation for Human Rights. My question is in relation, let me get straight to it. I think given the historical relation between SA and Norway in the pursuit of democracy, I would like to know what key learnings could come out of integrating young people within peacemaking and conflict mediation through the Youth, Peace and Security Agenda according to UN Resolution 2250, actually. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And then there were just here, yes.
Thanks, Pelani. My name's Oscar van Heerden. I'm an international relations scholar. Minister, I think, like the ambassador previously, I'd rather not want to comment on the double standard issue. I think the European Union has got very friendly relations with America, and we don't see any tension there, even though there's been aggressions in Libya, Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, etc. So the double standards is just too thick to even entertain. But my question, Pelani, is, it is safe to say that Norway and now lately Denmark and Finland joined the NATO because they saw a particular threat being posed by their neighbor called Russia. So my question to you is it conceivable that Russia can also take some action when it perceives a particular threat, especially in light of the fact that there were peace agreements that were being negotiated with Ukraine that were scuppered by the United Kingdom. There were agreements between Germany, France, and Russia in terms of Ukraine, which was not honored and acknowledged as not being honored by Germany and France. So in the absence of all of those international agreements trying to have peace and the encroachment of NATO eastwards, because it is an aggressor, contrary to popular opinion. We've only seen aggression from NATO, whether it is in Yugoslavia, whether it is in Libya and other places. So in the absence of that, what would you suggest was the option for Russia with this encroachment eastwards?
Thank you. There's the last ones here. Yes? Yeah.
Thank you, Minister, for that wonderful and contextualization of the relations.
Can you speak closer to your mic?
Thank you, Minister, and I would like to write on the protocols established previously. My name is Bilal Basuni. I'm with the Center for Africa and Near East Studies. I would like to get the Minister's view around the geopolitical competition on the continent around critical minerals specifically. Particularly, of course, we know that there's been historical competition with Russian, Chinese, and more lately US involvement, but also growingly from the European Union entering the fold of critical mineral competition, and what differentiates the European model, particularly your position, Minister, around particularly value-added processing of these critical minerals, or else we face repetitions, of course, historical extraction of resources from Africa without bringing out the best value for the continent. I would like your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Okay. Lerato.
Thanks. Hi. My name is Lerato Zabe. Hi, Minister. And thanks for your document. I've read through it. And I just wanted to, the document reads fine, by the way. It's quite expansive, of course, sectors, et cetera, et cetera. I just wanted to ask you, on page 3 of your document, it's under the heading Multilateral and Regional Cooperation, you talk about a concern that about the establishment and emergence of regional forums within the Global South and in Africa. And I think here you're trying to refer to maybe BRICS and G20, et cetera, et cetera. And you say in the document that you're concerned that these forums are essentially, I think what you're trying to say, encroaching on multilateralism or extracting a bit away of its essence and power. But then, I sort of question that and want to ask you about, well, then how do you explain your continued participation in NATO and then the EU as a whole? Is that also not more of one and the same? Or are you going to categorize those as a continental security entity and then a geopolitical entity? And you talk a lot in the document, which is good, about the reformation of the United Nations and about Africa's attainment of a permanent seat in the United Nations Security Council. I note that we've just commemorated the 75th anniversary of the UN Charter, just within the past 2 weeks. But I think it's safe to say we can all acknowledge that very substantive elements and components of the Charter are imploding, specifically the United Nations Security Council. And I realize that the past 3 weeks, a lot of the discussion within the UNSC has been about Africa attaining a seat there. But don't you think we're sort of running a bit of a redundant exercise as a body of people with extreme power are now really no longer able to exert and exercise it in a manner within which should assist in the sustenance of multilateral governance? It's, as you said, if you have power and you don't use it, that's neglect. And I think a lot of what's been happening over the past few months is the neglect of the Palestinian people.
I promise you, Foreign Minister, these are the last 2 I'm taking, and they've promised me they'll keep them under a minute. Sorry, up there, a young person, very quickly. We can't hear you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mthembu, and to the Minister. Minister, I took some time to really review the Africa strategy document of the Foreign Affairs Ministry of Norway, and it expresses a strong commitment on assisting the African continent to mobilize and develop resources in green energy, in fighting illicit financial flows But what I'm really interested in is to know exactly how is Norway assessing the success and the effectiveness of these initiatives that you have undertaken as an institution, the Foreign Affairs Ministry, and how are you measuring the impact of your involvement through your instruments like FASA, like the NOR Fund, and your support of the African group in the United Nations. Thank you.
Final one. Oh, can you switch that one off? Yeah, up there. Yeah.
Hello, Minister. Thank you. I'm Raimundo Robredo, Ambassador of Spain to South Africa. Thank you for a fantastic presentation, very precise. On the invitation, it says that you would touch upon Norway's position on the efforts by the Global South to reform multilateral institutions such as the UN, Lerato touched upon it, but also World Bank and International Monetary Fund and actually others. And I was looking forward to hear about Norway's position about that, if you can speak briefly about that. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Foreign Minister, floor is yours.
Well, thank you. That's a super rich set of questions. I will do my best to try to answer them as good as I can. But to Ambassador Napalo, was it? I think, yeah. The first question. Well, you pointed to very correctly to the presence of spoilers. I mean, this is absolutely true. I think what is, if I got you correctly, and I think I did, I very much agree that what we saw in what we call the Cold War was that players from outside of Africa, discovered that there were internal and regional tensions in Africa, and they went and worked to their cronies or proxies. And this is happening again, and I think the example of Sudan is a good one. Now there are other players from not so far away as in the old days, but these things happen again. And of course the answer is that's bad, and that the international community should try both to help the parties to a conflict to come to settlement, but also to try to prevent this exacerbation of conflicts by foreign involvement. So I mean, I think that's a very good observation, and it's I think if the point is that this still goes on, I totally agree with that. Then there was, I think, was it Nati, the student from Soweto? What do we do to stop wars? Well, one thing we do, empirically we haven't stopped neither of these wars, so of course we are failing. If the checkpoint is, did you actually stop them in time? We don't. So let's be honest. But we are both using, South Africa and Norway are among countries who at least are trying to use the institutions we have by raising these issues in the International Court of Justice to establish what is the legality. There is, of course, the one on genocide, but there is another one on the illegality occupation, where Norway has been very active, and there's also the issue of the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court. And this is all about, I'm not going into detail, but this is all about actually taking these institutions that were made and trying to use them. And I think that in the long run, it's worthwhile investing in that, even if it takes time. And then, of course, it is to be very clear in our political statements, is to make sure that we are actively supporting peace processes, but also humanitarian work. For instance, you might have heard that a number of donors withdrew their support from an organization called UNRWA, in the Middle East because of accusations that some members of their local staff had been involved in the activities of 7th October. And we did not, I think we shared that with Spain, by the way, that we did not withdraw. We said if individuals have done criminal acts, they should be fired and punished individually, but you cannot punish an entire organization for the transgressions of a few. And we campaigned to get people back, and now practically all donors are back supporting UNRWA. So we're doing our part, but of course there are players bigger than us that needs to do more to put pressure on those that they have more influence on in order to to get closer to actually putting pressure that leads to a real end of these wars. And I could speak for long about this because there are too many conflicts that take too much time, but most conflicts end at a certain point. And it's also important to, and there was a lady with a very good question about peace implementation, so let me take that immediately. And you're absolutely right, because there are we have too frequently thought that as long as we get to an agreement, and maybe an election, and then we get the agreement, we get the signature of the key players, we get the election, it kind of works, and then you think everything is in place. But then you realize all the things you didn't think of, and you need to stay the course, which is, what I've learned from working on some of these peace processes is that at least half of the work is still left after the agreement. And sometimes they work, and when they don't work, it might be either because it couldn't work, or because one did not pay attention to the long-term implementation. So some conflicts are stopped, that's the good news, but we haven't stopped these, and let's be honest, we're working on it, but nobody's perfect, nor are we. Was it Tambo on electric vehicles, right? Thanks for being here. If your question was about what is our experience, we, like everybody else, 20 years ago, we had fossil fuel cars. Today, practically everybody who buys a new car buys a fully electric car, more than 90%, which also means that, and we've done that for a while, which means that, used electric cars are in the market for those who can't buy a new car. And why did that happen? Well, principally for 3 reasons. We gave tax breaks on electric cars, so they did not pay the taxes that other cars paid. We invested heavily, or the private sector basically, but supported at times with the public sector, invested in a charging infrastructure, so you knew that you could actually get somewhere with that car. And we gave certain privileges, like using bus lanes, for instance, that you had certain congestion traffic privileges, or cheap. In our country, we have a lot of ferries. You put your car on a ferry, and they were cheaper. So the total cost of ownership went down. And then people started to trust these cars, and eventually, when your neighbor had one and the other neighbor got one and they told you it's actually a good product and it's a better product, people start using it. But it requires it requires an active, it doesn't necessarily require a lot of money, but it requires sort of a steadfast commitment to prioritize this and to make it available. And of course, we're back to the other question we touched upon, which is you need electricity to have electric cars, and that electricity should better be clean, because it's fine to start now when you still have a lot of coal, but the real environmental benefits, of course, only come when the car is charged by clean energy. So again, moving to a more electrified world requires electricity production, electricity distribution, because there's no transition without transmission, and the ability to use. And then you need the cars or the other vehicles and so on. But it's happening. And what was important with the Norwegian experience is that we're a very cold country. It's cold here in winter, but it's much colder in Norway, I promise you. So people think, can batteries work? Well, they work super well. They're a little bit shorter range in winter, but that's being worked on with sort of preheating and other technical solutions. And people actually say it's fine, it works, even in cold country with very remote, long distances to travel. So happy to share that experience. I'm glad that you're here, because this is essential. So much emissions come from transport. It is actually low-hanging fruit to electrify the transport systems, particularly the light transport system. Lorries are a little further down the line. Maybe they will need hydrogen or ammonia or something like that, or batteries. Let's see who wins the battle. But for cars, the future is electric. And the Chinese know this very well, because we pride ourselves by being the country with the highest penetration per capita of electric cars. That's fine. But the highest number of electric cars in total is China. And it's quite interesting that when Western countries, not us, but EU and US, discovered that the Chinese are making cheaper and better cars, they put up custom barriers, because although they want electric cars, they don't want them to be from China. So this is also part of the geopolitics of the world right now. We do not, by the way. We like cheap cars, and if somebody builds them cheap, that's fine for our consumers. Be my guest. I think your question, thank you, the question was, when will we put up a defense office? Yeah. You mean the defense attaché at the embassy, for instance? Yes. I'll talk to the, I think the ambassador would, would be happy to. It's not in the marks right now, but we are developing our partnership, so let's think about it. We have it in many, many other places, including outside of the national, of the West. There was another question on measuring effect. I mean, that's a great question. I don't have a very good answer because it depends on what we are measuring. I mean, there are certain things which are so concrete that you have a digital answer, it worked or it did not. Otherwise, did you influence a process that led to something? We're working on it through dialogue, through instruments of you're trying to identify what indicators that are, but it's a recurrent problem both in development aid and in peacemaking. How do you know exactly that your intervention led to this or that, or on the other contrary, that your intervention failed? Was it your intervention that failed, or was it would it fail anyway? This is difficult, but it is a serious question that requires serious attention, and good people work on that. And the implementation question I did mention. Yeah, and there was then on the digital environment. I think when we presented this Africa strategy last week, there was a participant in the panel who raised an African participant raising exactly this, that the penetration of social media, the fact that social media takes over as the main news channel for more and more people, particularly young people, away from edited news. With edited news, I mean a newspaper or a TV channel that has an editor, has some principles, which is, for instance, if somebody says you're a crook, that the crook, alleged crook, is asked, are you a crook? That you have, or that if one party is allowed to speak, another party is allowed to speak. But in these social media, you have algorithms that just drive you to bias confirmation, meaning if you're already biased, you get more biased because you only get that. That's a very worrying thing. And I remember when I'm old enough to remember the internet coming, and we thought now everybody would be so well informed because you can access any information all the time on your smartphone, which you can, by the way. It's just that it's not exactly the way it worked, because people did not necessarily get wiser, they got more monotomatic. And you can get wiser if you actively seek to get wiser, but you can also become totally nuts because you are only following sort of your clicks take you into bias confirmation. That's a big problem, and it's a problem all over the planet. But of course, the problem is particularly big if you don't have the penetration of edited media that we had before social media came along. And the other thing that strikes me is that also technology is also a feature of conflict these days. The existence of drones, of cyber attacks, of manipulation, false information, or partly false information which has a grain of truth but the rest is untrue, getting more difficult to distinguish, or the ability to use cyber attacks to destroy infrastructure, turn off the electricity, turn off the water supply, means that conflicts are also, if you want to deal with conflicts today, you also need to deal with this digital dimension of conflicts. The lady here in the white sweater was asking about involvement of youth. And Resolution 2250, massively important that if you really want to create stable peace, you need to involve the population. We talked about women, peace and security, so women, but also young people, to recognize how they are affected, but also how they can contribute. So definitely a key thing to follow and should never be forgotten. And just on that one, mention that peace, so I've seen many, peace negotiations has been, until recently, one of the last sort of strongholds of male dominance. Even peacekeeping operations are more gender biased than the table where peace agreements are made, which means that at least half of the population's views is not represented, and it's not necessarily the young either who are in the front. So good points from the lady there. Oscar, where are you now? There you are. Well, I think I will politely disagree with you on the premise, because I don't think that NATO was encroaching on Russia in no way. And these were countries who voluntarily wanted to join. And the idea in NATO, which we were a founding father of, is that if you want to join and you fulfill the criteria, there's a set of criteria, you can join. And then you are accepted. And every country, we were 12, now we're 32. Every single of these 20 countries that came after the 12 wanted to join. And lately Sweden and Finland had stayed out because they wanted to remain non-aligned. But when the war in Europe started and the attack on Ukraine happened, they said we better join NATO as well. And this is the way the Baltic states and Poland and so on have joined NATO. And the core reason to establish NATO, remember in the beginning I talked about the UN Charter. The UN Charter has an important Article 51, which is where it's spelled out that war is prohibited. Well, it's several chapters, but 41, 42, 141, 42, 51. But basically what they say is war is prohibited, but in self-defense, and self-defense can happen collectively. So you are entitled, according to the UN Charter, to do self-defense collectively with others. And the NATO Article 5, which is the founding article of NATO, says that this new organization, NATO, that came 4 years later, is preparing to exercise the collective right of self-defense. And that's what NATO does. And NATO has not provoked Russia, and I would actually strongly agree that that is wrong. We are aware that Russia was not happy about countries coming closer to them, but this is the sovereign will of these nations. And so I believe that we're good on that, and that the arguments of Russia that they needed to respond are wrong, because again, nobody invaded Russia. Russia invaded Ukraine. And according to rule number 1, as I mentioned several times, that means it establishes a state of war between an aggressor, which is Russia, and a victim, which is Ukraine. And sometimes it is as simple as that. And then there are more to it. But I mean, this is my view. I respect that there are other views. But I think my view is right. There was then a question on, let me see now who that was. I think it was you, right? On critical minerals? Yeah. So, I mean, the tragedy of many African countries, and maybe more than anyone, the DRC or the colonial Congo, but so many other countries, is that it was so rich. Not that it was poor, but it was so incredibly rich in natural resources that people came to steal the resources and did not develop the country. And this is the history of Africa. But some places it's extremely clear that that is the history. My very strong view, and I really want to use whatever influence I have to say that I hope that we can work towards a future where Africa does not export its raw materials, but they make products out of the raw material. First, I hope you do it sustainably. I hope we can develop a circular economy, which means that we take these things from nature and then we use them and then we use them again, and then you build smelters and factories and turn, because if you have raw material and electricity, you build a smelter, then suddenly you have not bauxite but aluminium or steel or whatever you have, and then you use that to build stuff, and then you sell the stuff, because then you have a value add of many times the actual value of the raw material. So, it used to be Europe in the old days. Right now, one of the most active countries are China, who is really looking to get hold of more African resources, and they're not alone. There are many of these candidates. And I'm not saying, I'm pro-international trade, but I think that one of the more sort of systemic challenges to development in Africa is that we've been too little control over raw materials. And remember, Norway itself is a raw material country, petroleum. Thankfully, and thanks to my predecessors, and I think this is an important, luckily enough, they understood that when they realized that oil could be extracted from the North Sea, which only became technically available, last century, and the Texans and so on done that before. We had no idea how to do it technically, so we needed to import expertise, but also to learn from them. So we had people from Iraq or from Texas and coming and teaching us how to do it. But we awarded them licenses. We did not sell them the raw materials. That's ours. It pertains to the citizens, pertains to the country always. They will never sell the raw material as such. We give them licenses on which they pay tax. And the tax you pay for extracting petroleum in Norway is 78%. 78%. You still come because oil is really worth something, so the 22% is still good. You know, you get quite rich with 22%, but 72% remains, 78% remains in the state coffers, and they go into the fund, the sovereign fund, which means we're also transforming petroleum income to eternal money, because the fund we will never reduce the fund. We only take out the revenue of the fund, the sort of the interest of the fund. We keep it. So the thing is, the message from my, not that everybody needs to copy Norway, but if you like to, you know, we're happy to say, stop giving people the actual. I mean, of course you sell the oil, but it's not your. It's not like this field or this mine is yours. You have a license to take out our stuff. But because it's ours, we put the price. And if you don't want to pay, well, go somewhere else, because it's my country, and you don't need to come here. We did. And the tragedy is that mining technology was known before you had states that were able to put these standards, right? It's not that we're not, smarter. It's just that we had the luck of our oil needed a technological level of development that only came when we already had these institutions, we had this premise. And actually we did this also with the waterfalls, which built our country, from 1905 onwards, when we became independent from Sweden. We realized that because Norway, I don't expect you all to know Norway, it's full of mountains and it rains all the time. So if you have mountains and rain, that means you get dams. And if you have a dam, you can probably have a hydro plant, and then you transform water into electricity, and you have a lot of very cheap electricity, which is clean, by the way. And then we built the smelters, and by the way, we also imported the raw materials from everywhere, probably also Africa, and we built the smelters, developed them there. But the thing is, even the waterfalls were not, if you could come as a company and build a waterfall, but it's our water, it's our waterfalls, our dam. You have the facility, yes, you will get some money, but it's ours. So I think this is really, there is so much wealth in so-called poor countries. And this is sometimes forgotten. It's not a poor country. Tends to have, it has poverty in the population and is poverty at state level, and the government does not have capacity. But there's a lot of wealth being generated. It's just that it ends up in Cayman Islands or Zurich or in Dubai rather than, or somewhere obscure other place, rather than in the country. So, land value tax or ground rent. A good tax policies that allows you to be a state to tax your citizens, but also the international companies there, and then good policies of distributive, how to use this for health and schools and education, and then build yourself richer. This is really the model to grow. That's our history, from poor to rich, is because smart people stopped all the people. And I'll tell you, there was one party in Parliament, which is very far from mine, who suggested we basically sell the North Sea to Phillips Petroleum. And there wouldn't be much wealth there, so let's give them a good price. They just take it. That would be a very bad idea, and we would not be anything close to what we are today, because we had people saying, no, it's ours, and you can come here, we need your competence, and finally you learn it. That was long, sorry. But I got engaged. Last point, that's you. Thanks for reading the strategy. Let me be clear. I am very much in favor of international cooperation at all levels. I love the UN, but I am also very much in favor of AU and SADC and NEPAD and you name it. And I'm in favor of the EU and NATO. The point is, we have to respect the principal nature of the UN and the UN Charter. So what I would be worried if you replace that role with something less formal. We are now a guest country of G20. We're not a permanent G20, we're a guest country. happy to continue that if we may. So we think that's an excellent place to meet, but it should not replace the formal institutions. And actually, the UN Charter has Chapter 8, remember, as I said, written in 45. It put in the chapter saying that regional organizations we should have regional organizations. It actually talked about the AU long before the AU was invented. It said if you can do something regionally, as well as you could do at the UN, fine, do it regionally. But it has to be in compliance with the principle of this charter. So I think the African Union is that. You know, the African Union is very much, the African Union has challenges to institutional depth, capacity, resources, but it's a very modern organization that in principle fits very well into the ideas that were there from 45 about trying to do regionally what you do locally. So if you read it as we are critical, that's not really the point, but we would be critical if the institutions that are formally established and where everybody's a member is undermined, then we would be critical. I'm sure I did not pay tribute to all, but that was the best I could do. But it's really a fascinating set of questions, and thank you for your engagement in today's MNU.
Please don't sit down. Thank you so much once more, Honorable Minister. Ladies and gentlemen, we are almost at the end of our proceedings today. So many insightful engagements. I think your last points were very pertinent, and I hope as the continent, as Africa in particular, we were listening. We are better off in a world that works and cooperates. It is better to grow and get rich together. Otherwise, even strict borders won't help us. We could have a full day engagement on that. Thank you once again, Honorable Minister, and I'm going to ask you to come and join me together with the Vice Chancellor. As the university, we have a small token of appreciation for your time and all the insights that you shared with us today. If we can just come and stand here. Sure. Oh, ladies and gentlemen, we had also another just formal closing. 2 minutes, please. Dr. Maureen Tong from the Special Projects in the Office of the Principal and Vice Chancellor will offer us vote of thanks. Just a few minutes, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor Sekgalo. Let me thank Foreign Minister of Norway as he leaves. We are fully aware of his time limits and his need to be at the airport very, very, very soon. Let's thank the embassy for creating this opportunity for us. As the University of South Africa, we are truly blessed to be based in Tshwane, where the majority of the diplomatic community is housed. And we certainly do not take lightly the opportunities that we have, like today, to have a room full of persons from the diplomatic community, from research institutes as VC's Living, and other members, and the embassy obviously are going to run off to see off, which we understand, to see off, you are really excused, to see off the foreign minister, and our vice chancellor as well is running to her next activity, which is quite pertinent. But as UNISA, we really, really appreciate the opportunity to have all of yourselves here engaging with us. We are an academic institution, and we are about creating platforms for robust engagement on issues, even those issues on which we disagree with and on which there are diverse views. So I will not take too much time. I think I'll just say thank you for coming, because the host and guests have already left the room, and we look forward to seeing you at our next event. Please keep coming, and please do collaborate with our office, make proposals on areas on which you could collaborate, as we are doing this afternoon, and we'd be very pleased to host you and to see you at our university. As the Foreign Minister has said, a world that works is for the benefit of all of us, and therefore we look forward to the opportunities to do that together. Thank you, thank you, thank you. The government is also well represented here. Academic institutions, political parties, religious bodies are here as well. We thank you most sincerely. As I hand over to Professor Sekgalo.